Nigeria's food security situation in 2024 is pretty much alarming, with over 31.8 million persons suffering from acute food insecurity, compounded by malnutrition amongst women and children. The country's food security challenges are exacerbated by various factors, which includes conflict and insecurity, with ongoing conflicts in the northeast, northwest, and north-central regions, having disrupted livelihoods, reduced crop production, and also limited access to food and income sources. There's also economic instability as Nigeria's macroeconomic crisis, characterized by high inflation at about 33.95% as of May 2024. Currency devaluation is also there, and revenue generation deficits as increased food prices and reduced purchasing power. There's also the issue of climate change, as climate-related shocks such as droughts and foods have impacted agricultural productivity, further compromising food insecurity. Now, to address these challenges, stakeholders, including the government, development partners, and civil society groups, need to come together to harmonize and work to achieving a collective goal. Now, to discuss this on the program this evening is Jelili Adebiyi. Of course, is a development scholar. He joins virtually from the United States. Thank you for your time, Jelili. It's great to have you on the program again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Dapo, for the opportunity to have a deep dive conversation about what the future holds in terms of
Jelili, if you can
security.
hear me, I can barely hear you, but I want to believe you can hear me well. It's great to have you. This is not the first time we are having this conversation around the food situation in Nigeria. I remember some time ago you gave some very, I think it was earlier this year, when you sort of forecasted that the situation would become worse much later into the year. And I mean, looking at reports and statistics, it pretty seems that's the situation. My question is there any light at all at the end of this tunnel?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Dapo, for the forward-looking question. How I wish I have a good news for Nigerians. We do not expect the outlook of nutrition food security to be any better in Nigeria in 2025, because we anticipate that as many as 33 million Nigerians would experience what we call severe food insecurity. And this severe food insecurity is going to be multifaceted. It's going to affect the availability component part of food security. It's going to affect the assimilation part of it, and it's going to affect the stability part of it. And we also expect domestic food production to be severely affected, to fall short of what is expected to help address nutritional food insecurity in the country. And there are multiple factors that explain why the situation is expected to be bleak. And one of these factors is the microeconomic crisis that Nigeria has been experiencing since the emergence of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the president of the country. We know that he has implemented policies that created economic volatility and that exacerbated the level of hardship in the country as a result of inflationary impacts of the policy implemented by the president and as a result of the adverse consequences of his policy on the value of Nigerian currency. So we expect the cost of farm input importation into the country to continue to rise, and likewise the cost of domestic transportation. And all of this will continue to worsen the existing status of food insecurity in Nigeria. And there are other drivers, stressors, that we expect would further affect the adverse outlook of food insecurity in Nigeria. And one of these is climate related. And when you talk about the climate factor, there is something that we often don't talk about in Nigeria for the most part in this conversation, and that is the question of climate variability. What most people focus on is what we call climate change. A more drastic impact is expected from what is related to climate variability. Of course, incidences such as heavy rainfall, data suggests that are expected to increase, especially in the northwestern and central part of Nigeria. Right. And also added to the variable is the question of drought and heat wave, which is expected to be cross-cutting across Nigeria and expected to have adverse consequences, including on the productivity of farmers themselves and on the overall agricultural productivity in the country. So there are multiple factors, include domestic and geopolitical tension. For example, the Russia-Ukrainian war is expected to continue to the adverse consequences that we are projecting of food insecurity, nutritional food insecurity in Nigeria.
Okay, so I would like to, pretty much come in here. I mean, you've listed quite a number of factors that, are responsible for the food crisis or insecurity that, Nigeria is currently experiencing. I remember that in the president's media parley, he talked largely on that. Even during the presentation of the budget too, he highlighted the issue of insecurity, particularly the prevalence of, the bandits and terrorist groups, which have, of course, hampered, the production process. How much of an impact do you think this has had on food production in 2024?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Dapo. Of course, the impact of domestic insecurity situation on food insecurity in Nigeria is massive. But that said, I train as a system dynamicist for your information and for the information of the foreign public. And what that means is that I'm not accustomed to looking at these issues individually because we're talking about system. So when you look at the food security issues in the country, even when you address the security situation in different parts of Nigeria, it doesn't mean that the outlook of food insecurity in Nigeria is going to be any better. Because we are dealing with a problem occasioned by multifaceted factor. And what that means is that we need to use multi-scalar and multifaceted intervention to address this issue. As much as we give priority to the security issue, we also have to give a lot more attention to the climate change.
Jelili, Jelili, if you can hear me, I'm sorry to interrupt your line of thought. If you can hear me, but we need to go on a quick break. When we return, we'll definitely pick up. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Many thanks for staying with us. This, of course, is still Politics HQ on News Central Television. And we are looking at the food situation in Nigeria in retrospect as regards 2024 as the year gradually winds up. I still have my guest with me, Dr. Jelili, and of course he's joining from the United States. Thank you for staying with me. You were trying to, of course, give a bit of analysis as regards some of the causes of food insecurity in Nigeria in the year 2024. And like I said, this is not the first time we're having this conversation, but I would like to ask you, looking at the framework or the strategy the president has, on ground to sort of shore up local production of food items. From an expert perspective, are we going somewhere?
I really want to be hopeful and optimistic, but as we usually say in the development ecosystem, data do not lie. It's one thing for Mr. President to lay out some plans. It's another thing for the plans to hard up, to be more position situated, to be able to help address the drivers of food insecurity in the country. There are a lot of gaps in the plans articulated by Mr. President. For example, it focuses a lot on the issue of security. And Mr. Dakwa, security is just one of the multiple stressors causing massive food insecurity crisis in Nigeria. Let's assume that the security situation improves in Nigeria. I don't think that is going to address, for example, the vulnerability of Nigerian agricultural system to issues of heavy rainfalls and incidences of flooding. And I want you to understand this there, for example. In 2024, as a result of torrential rainfall and flood across different parts of Nigeria, we lost about 1 million tons of crop, which is enough to feed 30 million people per year. Do you know the meaning of that, Dara? The meaning is that if the security situation in the country improves, does it address the issue of flooding? And we expect greater vulnerability to flooding and incidences of heavy rainfall in 2025. And when you also think about the issue of flooding, for example, it also comes with multifaceted consequences. One, it's inducing health crisis that is more massive and prevalent in the rural area in Nigeria. And we also have the issue of heat stress in the equation. We have the issue of drought in the equation. And that is why it's important that the plans of Mr. President be revised to account for the systemic nature of the drivers of nutritional food insecurity in Nigeria. What he articulated, in my own view and understanding, and based on the views of experts that are well-learned and familiar with the nutritional food security landscape and the overall agri-food system in Nigeria, are not well equipped to help insulate against the crisis that we are envisaging in terms of nutritional food insecurity in 2025 in Nigeria. There are also other issues that the plans of Mr. President did not touch on. For example, the issue of low agricultural productivity. He addressed the issue of agricultural productivity from the perspective of 2,000 tractors are going to be coming into the country. And this begs this question: is that the way to address the crisis of low agricultural productivity? And here, you are going to be looking at multiple factors. You are going to be looking at the crisis of declining soil fertility.
Dr.
You are going to be looking at
I'm
the
sorry
declining productivity themselves,
yeah, but
occasioned by many factors. All of these are not accounted for in the plans by Mr. President.
All right, I'm sorry, but I need to come in here. I mean, you've highlighted quite a number of issues. You said the president seems to be fixated on the security perspective alone as a problem to, sort of challenging this food insecurity that the country is currently facing. But again, you seem to sound like looking into 2025, there's no glimmer of hope. Is that what you're saying? Did you get my question?
No, I didn't get your question, Mr.
So my question is,
question?
You seem to sound like with this strategy, there seems to be no glimpse of hope in 2025 in tackling this food insecurity.
Honestly, the nutritional food security outlook for Nigeria in 2025 is bleak. And that is why we really need to take this seriously. We need to change our perspective, and we need to change our strategy. There is a need for multifaceted and multi-scalar approach to addressing this problem.
Okay,
and all stakeholders need to be involved.
Aside the production itself, let's also look at what some people would consider human factor, or the middleman or retail factor, where some people would take advantage of the popular narrative to say, oh, things are difficult, to make astronomical profit, right, at the markets. So you find out that basic items, even like gari, for instance, seems to be beyond the reach even of the common man. Even though we know there are problems, but when you look at the profit margin on some of these things, you ask yourself, is that fair? So, I would like you to speak on that, the middleman or the greed factor.
I know you are really interested in addressing this issue, particular issue in depth. Of course, there is the problem of the middlemen or the middle people involved in, hiking the prices of agricultural commodity. And you give a very good example of gari, which is a food security staple in the country. And I want you to look beyond them. Because when you look at the issue of gari, The increase in the price of Gari is as a result of some of the factors we have not been paying attention to in the Gari ecosystem. I remember when President Ibrahim Babangida, our wife, created the Better Life for Rural Women program in Nigeria. One of the areas it sought to focus on was the mechanization of the production of Gari. And I was in Osho State back in the days. And my mother was the one in charge of the first mechanization of Gari production system that was introduced by the wife of President Ibrahim Babangida. Since then, I've been paying attention to what is happening in the Gari ecosystem. Over the years in the Gari ecosystems in Nigeria, we've had the incursion of many actors in this particular ecosystem, with some of them growing cassava not for the purposes of Gari production, instead for the purposes of producing starch in order to provide raw materials for agro-allied purposes. And you have a lot of foreign stakeholders that are involved in this sector. We have a lot of Chinese that are asking our farmers to take away Gari cultivation, cassava cultivation for Gari purposes into the production of starch and other related agro-allied products. All of these are factors that over the years contributed to making the prices of Gari beyond the affordability of common men, of the common people in Nigeria. And that is why, to me, it's not enough to focus on just the role of the middlemen. It's about taking a holistic look at what needs to change in the entire agri-food systems in the country. And that is why one of the things we need to do is to change the way we frame the issue, is to change the way we provide solutions to this problem. Let's address the problem of the middlemen. Does that address the problem of Gari? The cost of Gari? I don't think so. Because other major stressors and drivers responsible for the escalation of Gari prices in Nigeria are still yet to be attended to and given a lot of attention. So we need stakeholders to come together across different scales, the national level, the state level, and the local level, to find out how we can address this issue from a systemic perspective.
All right, thank you so much for your time on the program. Dr. Jelili, of course, it's been a great one again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Mr. Akmo. And I wish you the best of the year in advance. And thank you, and have a good one.
All right, and you too.